was not available tonight, so she is absent and I am taking her place. And we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So please join me. All right, our first order of business is an executive session. The board will be in this executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.140 related to collective bargaining. It's expected to last 30 minutes. Executive sessions are not open to the public and no action will be taken. So with that, we'll head out to our room. Thank you. All good. All right. We are back in session from that executive session. And I do want to point out Director Gallinger was able to join us in the executive session while we were in there. So we are now on to public comment. It's an opportunity for comment on items not already scheduled for discussion on our meeting agenda. All public comments should be given now. Clearly state your name and school attendance area. Limit comments to 2 minutes. We have a timer to help with that. The board neither endorses or censors any opinions expressed in public comment. Please keep comments civil and respectful. No comments or applause from the audience, but feel free to wave hands to show support. Is there anyone in the room that had public comment? There was no one that signed up on the paper. No one else here. Anybody on Zoom? No one on Zoom. All right. Well, that takes care of public comment for today. And now we're on to the approval of the consent agenda. So we'll start with a motion.
I move, excuse me, I move the board approve the consent agenda as amended to include the motion language for the Issaquah High School Stadium Lights funding.
Second.
All right. Our consent agenda is a meeting management tool that lets us pass several items all with one motion. All board members have reviewed all the material in the consent agenda. And so now we're ready for a vote. All those in favor of approval of the consent agenda as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you. Are there any changes to the regular agenda?
There are no changes.
Thank you. All right, so we are on to works in progress.
Great, thank you. So I want to start off first with some congratulations to our communications team for being awarded 5 awards by the Washington State Public Relations Association this year. And I see some waving in the audience. Lots of waving, thank you. And there's just a highlight of 3 in particular where the school district was awarded best in category, and these are 4 school districts that have over 10,000 students enrolled. The first is in video, finance and funding, which featured the 2022 levy measures. The second best in category was also in video and storytelling, featuring one of our bus drivers, Bob Crosby, and it's a good promotional video for joining our transportation team. And then the final was a website rebuild category. So for it was website category, but for us, it was the Issaquah School District rebuild. So huge congratulations to our communications team and all those that supported that effort. And it's a great way to lift up the stories of our community and our people. So that's my first comment. I also want to preview a couple of things coming down the road with the board as it relates to engaging more deeply with the business community at large, both here in Issaquah, but also statewide. And in particular, to help inform what is really the future need of the workforce, which should drive what we do in public education to prepare for that so that our students can thrive, so that they can pursue their passion and potential, but that aligns also to financial sustainability and meaningful contributions to the world. So I wanted to share that with you all tonight and share that we are planning on scheduling in the very near future with the Greater Issaquah Chamber of Commerce and a couple of folks specific from that membership group, and have had contact this week with the Washington Roundtable. And they're very excited to help also partner with us to shape a conversation probably more in August or September, schedules permitting. So we're working on getting that up and running as well. And just to preview some of the questions that I've been sharing and preparing for those sessions. One is, what are industry trends and what will growth look like in the future for that industry? What are the labor and talent needs that the organizations and businesses have given that set of trends and growth needs? Specifically, what values, mindset, skills, and capabilities will be required to meet workforce demands? And then very openly, how can public education help? So those are the set of questions. As the board continues to think about this topic, please share more with me as we continue to progress, and we can help shape that time together. The next topic is on strategic planning, and we've turned our attention to strategic plan implementation planning, which is a more focused set of internal set of activities to give lift to the strategic plan itself. And we've expanded the group of administrators who will be taking on lead roles in owning strategies specifically. We will be spending, including tomorrow, about 7 hours with this group to start to map out plans, discuss outcomes, key milestones, targets, and trajectories. So we'll have another update planned for the board on June 8th about that work. And just one preview, we've shifted some of the language from metrics to say outcomes because some of the outcomes are qualitative in nature and metrics oftentimes refers to just quantitative numbers. So we want to make sure we're driving towards the right outcome in the future, not just chasing a number, so to speak. And so this work is all in service of our priorities in the strategic plan and the mission, the vision, and the ends. What I've noticed so far is it's fostering strong collaboration, engagement cross-functionally and beyond. And we are having great conversations so far as of today about what is it going to really take? And are we realistic in our planning? Are we starting to see across the system where we might be having overlapping efforts or efforts that are kind of in conflict with each other? So it's helping us also make choices, discuss those trade-offs, and then prioritize potentially. And overall, I would just say it's been very helpful to be working with delivery associates and supported and facilitated by Marcel Hauser, our senior advisor and strategy lead. So that's that. And then two more highlights. One is that the Sammamish and Issaquah Rotaries continue to support our students with both the Student of the Month celebrations and scholarship awards. Dr. Dana Bailey attends the Sammamish Rotary on behalf of the district, and I attend the Issaquah Rotary. And then finally, I'd like to share a highlight about a visit I had last week to Mr. Huddle's classroom at Cougar Ridge Elementary School. I attended a diversity book club, which Mr. Huddle facilitates during lunch. He read a book called Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, authored by Joanna Ho and illustrated by Dung Ho. And this was a great example of students engaging in content and images that reflect their background, spark cross-cultural conversations in the classroom, and also allow for students to share their own personal experiences and affirm their identity across all different backgrounds. And personally, I was so grateful for this experience for our students because that was not one that I had at the elementary level, to see my own background reflected directly in text and content and classroom discussion. So hats off to Mr. Huddle, who's also moving up with the fifth graders to Cougar Mountain Middle School next year. So he'll be continuing to foster those discussions as the students progress through their next transition point. So that's everything from me in terms of works in progress. And if there's any questions, happy to hear those or responses.
Great, thank you very much. I love the getting to go to, it was Cougar Ridge, right?
Yeah.
To have the book reading. That's excellent. Any questions for anyone? Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I'll also add to her shout out to our comms department. Really congratulations for all the work that you did and for your award. So good job. All right, so now we're on to the Issaquah High School Stadium update item. I will turn it over to you folks.
Martin Turney, Chief of Finance and Operations. I'm Mr. Mullins here, and Mr. Tom Mullins, our Director of Capital Projects. We're following up from the last meeting to give some additional details regarding potential funding for the stadium lighting at Issaquah High School. Can you progress 2 slides for me? Thank you. So potential project funding. I think the request was to identify where we could pull additional resources. So the first, so actually we have 2 projects that are that would fall under the ability to use these additional funds for the project. And the first being the Issaquah High Stadium Improvements Project, where we believe pretty conservatively we have about $160,000 left that we would not be expending on that project. And the ongoing Issaquah High turf replacement project, once we got the bids and have our estimates for what that project's going to cost, we believe we have somewhere around $240,000 conservatively that we could utilize for this project. So we could combine these 2 and be within the intent and scope of the original project and resolution. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the estimated project cost for the lighting, we are putting at $800,000. It's a little bit higher than what we've mentioned previously because we want to make sure we have adequate contingency and that we budget at a level that we know is adequate. Again, if it comes under that, then that would obviously change the total cost of the project. We want to make sure we have a reasonable amount there set aside for budget. Can you go back? Yeah, so piecing the elements together, the remaining budget from those other two projects that I mentioned just previously would be about half of that at 400,000. So the amount that would be needed from the board reserve, I would say is a maximum of 400,000. And so how we would go about treating this is as we commence the project, we know what the cost is going to be and we get close to what the total actual is. We would scale down the amount that would be transferred from the board reserve. So that's where we would reduce the amount. So we would limit the exposure to the board reserve, but knowing that the total would likely be about $400,000. Next slide, please. Tom, do you want to talk about next steps? Yep.
We've got the purchase orders cut for the various vendors. There's City of Issaquah and then Musco Lighting. And then we have a consultant. We're bringing on 2 consultants that we'll bring on board. And then those have all been cut and issued, and we're working with the City of Issaquah to get through the permitting process and see specifically what they require for permitting documents and be able to get through all of their questions and expedite the process. But it's going well so far, and we'll probably be submitting the actual permit early next week for the completion of the September 1st. Right now, planning and design, this is a little schedule I put together. Pricing, we're at the line item 3 there, permitting, and I put in some dependent upon City of Issaquah and some question marks. I gave it 71 days. I feel fairly confident right now we can meet that, and that'll put us starting construction around the 1st of August. Construction, I put in 21 days. That's very conservative. They figured 12 to 14 days, but wanted to make sure we gave ourselves a little room there. And should be able to make it for the first of September. And first home sporting event is September 5th, and the first home football game is the 22nd of September. Any questions?
Any questions? Dr. Gallagher.
So tell me about how it's going with the City of Issaquah, because you use nice flowery language. I actually really want to know, like, what is the likelihood that we're actually going to get the permit in our hand to be able to have this project completed by the timeline you've outlined?
I feel good about it. They needed to wait until we actually had a project before they spent too much time looking into this, but they've been very good about answering questions. I just got off had a meeting yesterday with the building department, went well. And I had a meeting today with the planning department. He gave me a couple little items that the designer needs to provide, and we'll be in. I feel very good about it. I really do.
Great. So my request for the superintendent is, if for some reason you hear from the capital projects team that we're having a delay in getting that permit, I think the board would like to know that so we can do whatever advocacy we need to do, because this is a safety issue, number one.
Yeah,
And
and there's been some good input from the community. There's been some, and everywhere from the city council to the mayor's been included, and I've made sure that the staff have seen that, and they're very aware, and I think they're very willing to make this go. Hopefully it's the start of a turnover of a new leaf with them helping us to get permitting through in a timely fashion.
That's great. And
Yeah.
when is the first home soccer game, right? Because it's not just about football.
I was
Way more
told,
soccer games than there are football games.
yeah, I was told the first home sporting event was September 5th. And I think that was a soccer game. So. And then like I said, the home football game's not till the 22nd, but we're shooting for that 1st of September.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? I had one.
Yeah.
Is there, since this, I don't mean an impromptu project, but kind of came along quickly, is there any impact on activities that were already planned to be done on the field, the athletic field during the month of August?
What's nice about the lighting project is it doesn't interfere with activities on the field itself. The only thing it affects would be anything that goes past dusk, which can vary during the summer. If it's a bright night, we can get 7:30, maybe even close to 8 o'clock at that time of the year without really needing lights. And there's a couple outside events that are during that time outside the district events we can only go by last year's schedule. This year hasn't been done yet. Most of them are within IHS sports and band and things like that go later. And we're working with them to message with them to say, hey, be prepared. And,
Good.
Yeah, I think the latest event, there was one that went till 10 last year, but most of them were done at 9. And, and like I said, if it's a sunny day, we could probably get till 8 o'clock without needing lights, but on a cloudy day, that could be cut back till 7. So,
Good,
but-
good that you're communicating with them so that groups know that this is going on, so we can get this important project done.
absolutely.
Great. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. All right, we are now on to EL 12. Yeah, EL 12. So we'll start. Oh, actually, EL 12. Not what? Not yet. Wait, where am I? No, not on this one. Oh, yeah, I got myself confused. So we are on EL 12. Even though I said that numerous times, I was forgetting which item this is. This is a recap of the work study that we had been doing. So I will turn this one back over to you.
Yeah, so we have a short presentation just to recap where we are. That will be led by Andrea, your executive director of high schools, and really to make sure that we get enough time and space to have the board discuss any further thoughts, additions, reflections that will help guide our work moving forward. So thank you.
All right, so it's already introduced, so I'll just jump right in. I'm going to just share very briefly about our EL 12 work study and kind of what we observed as some takeaways and next steps to set up for your all's discussion. Got my handy clicker over there. Thank you. The purpose for today is just to recap some of the highlights and next steps we heard from the work study, and then thank you so much. And then hear a discussion from you all about next steps and priorities. So some of the key takeaways were just that we did recognize during the work study that all staff felt very aware of EL 12 and had opportunities within their schools and their teams to work on alignment. We found out that we do have many shared core beliefs around like learning being the priority over grades being currency, and that in high school, grades are often the primary communication between families and students. But we still recognize that there's a wide range of feelings about those things, especially in that idea of the balance between autonomy and alignment, and the fact that there's a variety of ways to execute those things in terms of the learning and currency and a variety of challenges. We recognize that time seems to be the biggest barrier, time for the staff to work together, and that we definitely heard echoing that we need a common definition of mastery, since that seems to be the root of this. We need to pursue the ability for ISD to have a district minimum. So really looking into like, what do we control and what can we direct versus encourage that align with the best practice work we did in a lot of the grading work leading up to EL 12. And we need to look at how do we make sure these things are widely communicated. So a lot of the things we talked about and heard is some absence of students really knowing what each teacher's policy is, and that's because they're also different. We need to work with teachers to clarify and define what's expected and provide teachers the support that they need to execute. So some of the things we heard about, some of the challenges of doing some of this work within like Canvas and Skyward. And we also heard that there's complexity and conflicting pros and cons about many of these changes. So like the point hustling and student time management and how our post-high school partners use grades. So like if we want to make significant changes, there's all these sort of external factors and impacts that are complex around all of this work. Some of our next steps and reflections that we thought were we definitely heard about equipping teachers more with some of the tools of how to do some of this work specifically within the platforms that we're using. So what does this look like and what tools are available to do some of this, make some of these changes in Canvas and Skyward? Definitely increasing the professional learning time around this work that includes time for collaboration and application. And doing the work to explore that idea of a definition of mastery and a minimum standard. Some of the specific ideas that were mentioned were getting a list of like controllable items in terms of like what's within our control that we could require versus what are the suggestions, especially in terms of there are many ways to do this work well. And then definitely pursuing the idea of some common expectations and common ways to communicate those expectations so that it's a reliable place for students and parents to look in Canvas to find this information around like recovery and retake and definition were definitely things we heard over and over again in that work study. So that's very quick recap to set up for you all's discussion for me to be here to take notes and listen and.
All right, comments, questions, thoughts from the board? Anybody? Director Gallinger.
I was waiting if anyone else wants to go, but I agree. I think we heard mastery a lot. And I think it didn't click for me till the last of our 2 sessions from our teaching staff about how important that is. So I think that definitely belongs in the interpretation of EL 12 rather than something that is board policy, because we've been pretty clear that our job is just sort of set broad strokes of policy, and it's the administration's job to provide that definition. And I think that'd be helpful. And so what we heard from teacher that they use is kind of like 85%. That makes sense to me if the average GPA, and this is why I want you to validate that for me. With Skyline, the middle 50% GPA is 3.5. That would correlate with an 85%. And I would assume that the middle 50 GPAs are probably similar in all of our comprehensive high schools. So, because just by the, common sense test, somewhere mastery is somewhere in the 80s for me. But it was good for the teachers here. Like, it wasn't the board saying everyone needs to have a chance to get 100%. That's not at all what it is. And certainly 70% seems low for me to be considered mastery. So, but I think I would be open to where that falls in, but I think we do need to clearly list that out.
Director Marley, do you have, no? I was just gonna say, it's an interesting, this idea of mastery and what we're referencing is mastery. But of course, passing a course is a D, right? So if we're trying to help kids have opportunities for recovery to reach mastery. So what we're saying that kids should have multiple opportunities on assessments or significant assignments that would help them reach that mastery level, whatever the mastery level is.
And
Director Weaver?
I would just say multiple, you were to use more word multiple. I think that also probably needs some range or definition, because
Yeah,
again, we
not
didn't
endless.
say correct. That's multiple is very different than endless. And I think sometimes our teachers for that is like, well, they need to keep giving that.
Right.
Like, no, that's not at all what we've said. But we say we don't want it also to be high stakes where they have one chance, because that's a lot of pressure, and it's not real world.
Director Weaver?
Well, I have 2 things. One is, to me, 85 seems really high as a definition of mastery, since we're trying to kick kids over the bar. But in fact, I don't really think it's up to the board to define that. I think that goes back to the district and the staff to figure out what they're comfortable with. I think where my frustration comes in on some of this is we're still talking about, well, what can the district require versus what can the district suggest? And the teachers saying, well, yeah, we'd heard about this, but we thought it was a suggestion. We didn't really know it was something we had to do. And it just feels like it's been, I don't know how many years that we've been talking about this, that we should have narrowed in on, and maybe it's the district saying, okay, the board really wants this. And then if staff wants to push back and give reasons why that's really unacceptable, certainly we would listen, we would entertain or whatever. But this idea that, oh, it's just kind of this amorphous suggestion that's coming down from the board, it feels like this has been going on too long for people to still think that. So I don't know. I'm a little frustrated by that.
I agree, and I think that's why having that video from the board would be really helpful, because I think we dispelled a lot of myths when the teachers from both sessions heard us. They're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like I don't think they had a concern about any of the why behind it or the actual policy words as listed. And just comment on the whole 80, to me, 85 seemed really high at first, but why 80 seems low? If 80 is a 3.0, am I doing my math right? I'm just new to this whole high school thing. And our average GPA is higher than that in our high school. That seems to be weird to set a level lower than what the average student is currently. That's why that didn't make sense for quote mastery. Which is what we, right, but that's what we want. We want the average student
To reach master.
to reach mastery, right? So this is really just like most policies or most rules are meant to capture the broad swath and to get everyone over that bar. And we want everyone to have that chance. And what I worry about is like, oh yeah, so our policies are good for 80% of the students, but we want our policies and our classroom practices to be good for 100% of our students. And that's what this matters to me.
Director Maldo.
I was thinking of mastery being more of a range rather than a hard pressed line, because I think some of that is dependent on the student. And I think that that is some of what we were hearing from our student rep that was there, was that for them an 85 could still plummet them to what they're going to do. And their level of identifying for themselves what is mastery to them is different. So that's part of the problem, is I think each individual student will see that differently. And if you are really struggling in a subject, especially I'm thinking math or reading, getting just to that B feels like mastery compared to maybe what you were experiencing in previous grades. So I think for me, I'm less about having a hard and fast what this is. What it is I do want those multiple opportunities for students to show their mastery of something. And then that grade really does become, if you are approaching mastery, that's a communication tool. And then, that again, grades being currency versus communication, right? It becomes a communication that if you're in the 70s, or if you expect to do X in your future, an 82 may not be the mastery level that you need to be at to achieve your full potential. And so I think that that's what I want to communicate, is like, well, you haven't really mastered this to the level that you're going to need to master it. And then, so what are your opportunities to go back, relearn, and show that mastery, so that you're not, for me, the biggest thing is I don't want you to be penalized because you haven't mastered something yet, because something may take you longer or a few more iterations to demonstrate it. And so I'm worried about, it's interesting. I like that you are worried about the top end of our student body. And I'm really like, what are we doing about that bottom end so that they will, especially in math, if you don't do well in your Algebra 1 class, the rest is never going to really come to you. It's just going to be a struggle the whole time through. I'd rather them learn and master and take time to master that before moving on.
Director Weaver. I think you're talking about two different things, because there's mastery, which is, have you learned enough of this class to say, yes, I took Algebra 1. I learned most of Algebra 1, versus you're also talking about desired outcomes. There are a lot of kids for whom an 88 is not a desired outcome. And while I understand that, I would still argue that if they got an 88, they've mastered it. And I also don't want to be in a position of somebody who gets an 80 and comes home with a B. I mean, in my household, we would have had a party for that. And to say that that's somehow not mastery because you should have had an 85, it's like, no, that's a B. That's really cool. Honestly, a C+ would have been great. So I don't want us to inadvertently set this bar so high that Kids who are just kind of trucking along, getting a B average, suddenly feel like they're not okay, right? That's not good enough. So maybe it's a semantics issue of what do we actually mean by mastery? If we have kids at Skyline who are averaging a 3.5, that's pretty amazing. But I would still argue that mastery is something less than that. So and again, I'm not sure this is something that the board should be arguing, because there are probably education minds out there who can figure this out a whole lot better. But I don't want to inadvertently make B students feel bad about themselves, or C students for that matter, because so many people want, a 95. I also don't want to create a situation where, we have kids that just keep taking exams because they want to get as high as they can.
Well,
So-
is that part of what the issue is with that line of, is it the limiter on if you set that line and now you hit mastery, that's what this line's about, then you don't get to keep retaking it to reach that nth degree of nearly 100. Because, right, so it's kind of the bar of which below the bar has opportunities to get above that bar.
I agree. And I think that what we heard from our teachers, if we gave a range, that would not solve the problem. Like, I think we heard very clearly from them that they need a defined space by which they can adjust their policy and practice based on. And if you set it at 85 or 84, 80, whatever, like, it's not that every student has to go do a retake or has to do, they can be perfectly content with their 78 or 79 or 80. I would say in my limited year as a freshman parent, in algebra 2, certainly high 70s and 80 is not mastery. Like, as I've worked alongside her all year, and when she's doing and performing at that level, like, she doesn't understand it. So, I'm not convinced 80 is actually a level of mastery. Now, in language arts and social studies, it certainly possibly could be, but even then I would argue that that's not. But I think we have to set a standard, whether we like the feeling that, and not by we, I don't mean the board. I agree, like, that's not the board's role. But right, if you're in elementary school, like, there's still standards, right? That's the whole point of at the end of the year, you're 1, 2, 3, or 4, and there are levels and cut points that define that. And whether we like it or not, that's the world we are in. And until we're out of a point-based, GPA-based world, we have to help our students and teachers have a common language. I think that's the goal for me, is that we have a common language and a common defined response to intervention. And because right now we don't.
I would say at the elementary though, your 1, 2, 3, or 4 is an overall assessment from the teacher, not a grade book that did percentages the way they do in middle school and high school, right? And that is it. So how do we have this common language? I'm just, I would love to one day get rid of the percentage based definition of grades, and that would be like my dream. But until that comes, I agree, what is our common language? And I don't know, I think if you give a 5-point range, that wouldn't cause the problem all over again. I think it's just having nothing clearly defined at all. And I think the teachers, again, what I think is the most empowering for teachers is to say, you're not tied to the percentage that ends up in the bottom of the score. Like, what we're hiring you for is your expertise in facilitating learning and then being able to assess where that student is at. And I know it breaks all the rules, and that I don't care about. But I would think that would be the most empowering for me as a teacher to go, the student has an 89.7. Are they really a B student? Like, who defines that? Who said that I have to follow this rigid rule of percentages when I made up the rules for what was weighted anyway? It just doesn't make sense to me that we're so tied to this percentage. And that's I think what I heard most from the student was that that was what was feeding so much of the anxiety around their grades and why they're trying to, grab more pieces of that percentage to feel like they're successful. And it's like, what can we do to alleviate that? And I know that I'm probably 15 years ahead of where we would ever go as a group, but that's really where the policy needs to be. And not being able to get there is probably the most frustrating thing about being a school board member.
All right. Anything you want to add?
I think this will lend itself nicely to the interpretation in the next agenda item.
All right. Give y'all what you needed, at least for the next steps. All right, thank you. All right, now we are on to the next item, which is the review of the superintendent's interpretation of EL 12. And I will let you, if you want to lead us into it, and this is one where I will ask if there's anybody that wants to give public comment, and then the board can discuss.
All right, so Andrea might need to stay close and Rich Malish might need to stay close too, because I wanted to, in case there are further questions on this one, but I wanted to just share a couple of things that I've done after hearing the discussion from the work studies, as well as reviewing multiple times last year's board discussion, because I know the interpretation was also revised last year. And so really wanted to highlight a couple of key specific changes I have made. So one overall was to focus on the intent behind EL 12. I feel like through some of the details, very high details or very specific details in the interpretation, we started to get lost in the intent. And so I wanted to bring us back to the intent. And I heard that coming out from how the board discussion was kind of going in the last two work studies. And so even a minor shift in leading in the general interpretation with the emphasis of learning environment, and then having that supported by the tools of grading and homework. And that shift is also made a little bit further into the interpretation. I also aligned some of the language to the board's newly adopted vision. In some of the areas, I removed sections in the interpretation, not because I didn't believe it was relevant, but because I believe that's part of the monitoring evidence that can be pulled forward. And I'm eager to hear your feedback and reflections on that. Also added specific language about meeting diverse learning styles and needs across the different sections as well, and at least two different sections. And let's see, in the first section specifically, I know I'm jumping around, but I was kind of going globally and then a little more specific. And Director Moraldo, you just spoke about this, and is the role of a grade as a communication tool. And that was something that you spoke quite passionately about at the last year's board meeting as well. And I wanted to just acknowledge that explicitly in the interpretation, that it is a communication tool about where a student is in their learning journey. I also made explicit reference to how we engage and get feedback, not just solely in the form of surveys in section 12.3 or section 3, and how we look at grading and homework as a mechanism to reduce stress, which I heard just now a little bit across for all of our students, but I've heard Director Gallagher speak concretely about that at many points in time this past year. In 12.5, that section added some clarity in addition to students in terms of course selection, but also families. I think there's been conversations throughout this year that have said that this is a partnership not only with students, but also their families, to make sure that the course selection sets up our students for the right next step within their educational journey itself. And then finally, I made a shift in 12.6. And again, this was actually directly from the conversation last year. I believe it was Dr. Gallagher. I can't remember. I believe it was, who talked a lot about how it's not just the lesson. The lesson is one reflection potentially of the learning, but really what is the philosophy and approach? And so directly referenced standards for Washington State and Castle. Because it's not the lesson, it's about how is, the lesson of vehicle is a vehicle. It's not the content itself. And I think the intent of the board and the policy is to really focus on the content itself, agnostic to the vehicle that we talk about then and bring forward what the vehicle is. And we've actually learned this past year that the vehicle, in some cases for high school, has been a first step, but not the full intent. So that's a bit about some of the changes and shifts, and eager to hear feedback, questions, or discussion.
Well, first, I'll open it up if there's any public comment on this item before the board chimes in. Is there anybody in the room? I don't see anybody. Is there anybody on Zoom? Okay, so I'll open it up to the board for any discussion or feedback. Well, I know for me, the first thing that jumps out is part of the interpretation. I guess it's for number 1. And then item 1 within that, interpret to mean that students have a clear understanding of mastery and how there are different methods to show mastery, right? Even we are talking about what is that definition of mastery, right? So that it'll be a whole culture shift to help all of us understand how we all want to define mastery.
Well, and I think that's important because our students told us at the last meeting that it wasn't clear from teacher to teacher that they had multiple opportunities or what they needed to do to access those. And sometimes it was obvious right there on the website. Other times you had to ask or push or whatever. So I think that's important.
Well, and if you ask kids what mastery is, you'll get a variety of answers, right? I mean, there'll be kids who say mastery is when I get 100% because I have mastered it when I get it all. And there'll be others who say mastery for them is getting a D because they passed.
I agree. That's why I think we have to draw a line in the sand, as unideal as that is. And we may walk right away from that the following year and be like, well, that
That didn't work.
but that's okay. Well, clearly what we're hearing from our teachers and our students is that what we currently have isn't working.
Well,
And so our best attempts to do this is flailing because we all need to operate by the same, like, at least what's the threshold by which it triggers the multiple attempts to demonstrate mastery. And until we document what that threshold is, I think we're going to continue to have this uneven application of mastery.
And it goes back to having consistent experiences for students. So if you have teachers that are picking different lines, then kids have different opportunities to reach that mastery or have those multiple opportunities to reach mastery. You have a great improvement if they've had that one test where they just did terrible on it and they want that opportunity. If everybody has a different line, then the students experience a very inconsistent experience. Okay, other comments about the interpretation or feedback?
So I appreciated our superintendent going through and talking about how the detailed interpretation is really what she believes belongs in the evidence. And I just want to really check that to make sure, because what was crossed off in all of section 1 was really, really important things. And so I don't want that to be lost. And if that's your intent for all those things that were crossed off, that it's going to be evidence, and that's great. But there's really important alignment language that's missing in your interpretation. And I like that it's very student focused, but ELs are really system focused. Student focus is really our ends. And so that's why the system alignment pieces are missing. And I trust if your evidence is going to reflect that push for system alignment, but we don't generally focus so much on student first language in our ELs because it's really system work. And so I just don't want that lost about particularly C and D. Those are really system alignment things that I feel is missing. And so I just want to hear from you that your intent is that will still be carried through via the evidence. I don't know if what I'm saying is making sense about student versus system.
Yeah, it's completely making sense. Thank you. And I did see some of it as a mix, right? I can see some of it being brought back into the interpretation and some of it being in the evidence as well. So on one hand, for grading practices, the grading categories and weights should be the same. We have had some progress on that front, and so and Andrea can speak a little bit about that one, but I do think that would be a combination of possibly bringing back forward some of those details. But it felt like it could be handled that way, but it's helpful to hear the feedback that as we consider the system lens, that we are not losing sight of the expectations that are clear, what I'm hearing, and how that gets communicated, calibrated, and followed up on is an important system role. And when I was thinking about the language for students, it was that there's work behind that. So, you know, even in the conversation that you just had as a board right now on what is the line in the sand, on what mastery is, that I'm not interpreting it necessarily as first and foremost, but you know, in next year, it might actually be that there's a test where we say this is either a range or a line in the sand, and we have teams start to test that out potentially, which then we can continue to make progress towards and show evidence of over time. That then might in the future become actually part of the interpretation. So I can see some of it shifting in that way as well. And that's how I was thinking about if students have this clear understanding, it means we've done our work evidence-wise to say, we've had conversations, where do we think the line in the sand is or the range is, and what does that trigger in the event that a student is either above or below that line or range. Sorry, I wandered into a different topic there, but C and D, thank you for calling out C and D in particular as systems alignment, nuances that you don't want to lose from a board intent.
And then same thing for 2, again, what I feel like is lost is the alignment part in number 2, which is about the consistency across courses within a school or across buildings. And that's the intent of that. And that language is completely struck out of your interpretation. And it's more a philosophical approach or interpretation of what homework is or should be. And really the intent of number 2 for us is that there needs to be system alignment for what like literally homework is from a volume, breadth, depth standpoint.
So some of that language was brought forward into the above, in terms of, so in my mind, I interpreted that as, so if I don't talk about the volume component specifically, when I consider teachers and their homework expectations, they're calibrated and consistent across grade levels. To me, that is a system response, but I don't want to lose sight of what the intent was here. Because, you know, again, this is, I'm coming in with a different set of eyes, and so I don't want to lose it. But I was trying to state that up front in that set of words.
And I guess by me reading your words, I can't see where, so for instance, I can see where it's fine that Sunny Hill is a no homework elementary school and Discovery is not a no homework elementary school, and both would be right based on your interpretation. And that misses the system alignment part. And so then those kids both get into Pine Lake or to PCMS formerly, and they have very different experiences in their 6th grade year based on their elementary experiences with whatever homework policies the elementary schools had, because they're so different across our 16 buildings. And so that's why when I read your interpretation, like they could both be right, because it's more about just, hey, your homework needs to be age appropriate and developmentally appropriate and, you know, align amongst your grade level teams. But it's missing the point of how are we preparing every student in every building to have the same experience, so they're prepared the same way as they do the transitions, because especially as our system is bigger and more complex, we're mixing, our feeder patterns are way more mixed than they ever have been.
Yeah, the intent was not to have kids coming in from different elementaries to middles or different middles to different high schools and having completely different preparation experiences. So that was not the intent to, but it's a helpful illustrative example of how it could then be playing out in a way that was not intended.
Director Moraldo? Yeah.
I think one of the things that, you know, I guess going back to number one and wanting us, systems level for that, I think, like, if I were to look at the first bullet point, 1.1, students have a clear understanding of mastery. I think it would be that your systems are in place so that students have a clear understanding of mastery. So I think what you have is the end result. So what's the system piece to that? I did want to say, if you are planning to put in somewhere else the components that were lined out, that I think letter B on that. So what is that? 3B. So 1.3.b. Students have should have the opportunity to recover from late or below standard work in order to demonstrate meeting or exceeding standard. I think gets just into a completely muddy, wait a second, we're meeting or exceeding standards over here and we have mastery over here. So I would want some alignment in language with regards to that. And so I see number, I think it would be number, is it number 3? I thought I saw somewhere that it would be interesting to say that recovery services provide for students to experience consistency, or I don't know, or that, I don't know. I thought I had found a place where recovery services could be put in the 3 that you had, but now I can't find it. It doesn't fit. My brain wasn't working right.
That's okay.
Yeah, I do take it, we talk about remediation and acceleration in section 5. But yeah, standards versus mastery,
Right.
different.
Mixing the words.
Yeah, different, could be mixing of the words and potentially send mixed messages in some way, shape or form in actual implementation.
Yeah, and I haven't noticed that before, Dr. Moraldo, about the meeting or exceeding standards. So that's how our teachers would interpret. Have said like, oh, we have to keep giving it till the students can all get 100%. Well, I get that. Now I get where that's coming from. So it's like, that's not ever been our intent, but again, our language doesn't say that. That was
Right.
the
Right.
interpretation.
Part of the interpretation.
And that's why we have this noodling over what is your interpretation, because
Right.
oftentimes that gets put into the system, that's the systemic way that it's implemented.
Well, and there were things in the old interpretation that were, that came specifically out of conversations of things that were giving the board indigestion. One of them was grades should not reflect non-academic factors, because there was a time when teachers would say, oh, wear your Spartan gear on Friday and get an extra 10 points. Well, that's nice extra credit, but has nothing to do with algebra. Or, and then the other one was the volume of work should be consistent, because that goes back to the complaints of one teacher giving a huge volume of homework, another teacher giving very little. So there's just, and I'm not saying those things necessarily have to be explicit in the interpretation, but just remembering that there was a reason they were there, and it's because they were happening.
Because it was also to get behind the intent, right?
Yes.
It's when you're treating late work as a penalty, are you penalizing the behavior or are you penalizing the content?
Right.
And our intent is that a student is judged based on their competency, not based on their behavior. And I know that they can be difficult to tease out sometimes, but that's why it's specifically called out about late work, because again, we didn't want teachers penalizing students or judging or grading them based on a behavior.
Right. Or where they had an opportunity to recover from that behavior, because these are all young people who are learning and growing. So they should have that opportunity.
Right. I explicitly had a child who failed to do a whole lot of work and was on the verge of not graduating because it was a course required for graduation. And the teacher said, well, I don't accept late work. Like, okay, well, then my kid's not going to graduate. Can we give 50% for late work? I'm not saying he doesn't have to do the work. Of course he has to do the work, but if you don't accept it late, he doesn't graduate, right? And that was an extreme example, but hey, it happened to my kids, so it does happen.
And that highlights the unevenness that we want to get away from, that it's not whether a student or a parent advocates for it, that every student knows, hey, this is the line and this is how I meet that.
Mhm. How they can advocate for themselves. And then it's left up to the students, right? They have to choose to want to reach mastery, to take advantage of the multiple opportunities. And we hope they do when it's needed.
And that's the system part too. I mean, philosophically, if you have a class and the average of your math test is 65, like, I don't think that's a reflection of the student's inability to reach mastery. I think it's a reflection of the teacher's inability to help the students reach mastery. And I think there's that back and forth. Or even if everyone gets a 70, if the average is 75 or 78, like, that's not mastery in my book. And that's why I think I have a hard time with 80 being the threshold, because I don't think that truly is mastery, and not in a district where our average is 85.
It makes me think though, for every super exceptional student, there is a student that helps meet the mean.
I would say, I mean, sort of statistically speaking, yes, but if you look at the grade bands, and I mean, I'll let Rich can probably answer this way better than I can. Our standard deviation is really narrow in our high schools for our GPAs. I was quite surprised by it. At least Skylines. I don't know about the other schools, but I imagine they're similar.
I don't think we can validate that exactly right now, but but with the premise,
Yeah.
we can, utilize as part of that conversation on definition of mastery and all the factors that go into it.
All right.
So helpful. I mean, this was helpful because there's not all discussions are recorded. So I can't go back to all of the discussions. But this is very helpful and bringing, I didn't want to lose a nuance, but I was also attempting to sort of restate it in a different way. And really making sure that there's one point that just you brought up around, do all students know how to access? And so sometimes advocacy is knowing just how to access. So some students learn how to advocate and some don't. So we want to make sure that they are accessing that process by which they can advocate for self. If they are needing to submit work in a different timeline or potentially multiple times to reach a level of expectations that are required for content mastery. So all very helpful, but open to other comments if there are, and I wasn't sure if there's a movement for
I
that.
just have a technical question on Canvas, like when you do the drop down and there's like whatever 5 or 6 options, do we get to choose what they are? So could one of them be grading policy so that every teacher in our district put it under the same subcategory? You know, where it's when you do the drop down and it shows grades, modules, assignments, et cetera, that section, do we get to choose? Could we say and create a district one that was grading? Because they had grading and homework policies. It would be really nice that way every student and every parent would know this is the one link I click on for every class.
Yeah, so this year, one of the things we did is we kind of pushed out here's our recommended standard, but we can't lock it down as a district, so a teacher can rearrange it. And so we're going to continue to work on that, especially at the building level where so a student can get something as close to similar from teacher to teacher as possible. But we don't have a way of locking those things down. A teacher has the ability to move those around. And so that's the challenge of that.
I'm just talking about the location. Like, can we lock down the location? I'm not talking about the content.
No, we can't. There's a lot of user ability to change the location of various features on there. So that's why that it varies teacher to teachers. They do have that ability. We can't block that. Is my understanding. I'd have to look at these very specifics, but I've had this conversation a couple of times with Director Eggers.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, unless there's anything else. All right. Now we are on to monitoring report for EL2. And I think you wanted to make a comment, Superintendent?
Yes, I wanted to amend the version that has been submitted and posted online to be a monitoring report with an exception, because there is an item on page 20 if you look at page 20 in the clean version, not the edited version. I did want to note that we had some conversation about this, so Dr. Dana Bailey can speak more about this as well, but we did find that there was a box of files that was lost during a move from Cougar Mountain Middle School. There was 2 moves that year. And we did find the error and attempted to recover it and chase it down, and ultimately could not identify the location, but we were able to recreate the file. So the exception is it did happen, but we also had a plan and we knew what had happened and we figured it out to the best of our ability. We tried to figure it out to the best of our ability. And Dr. Dana Bailey can share more, but the question, is that an exception, or is that because we figured out what happened and we caught it, or is it an exception that should just be noted as part of the larger? So upon further reflection, I think, we wanted to move it forward with an amendment for board discussion and consideration that it would be a monitoring report with an exception.
Okay, thank you very much. And then now we'll take a motion.
I move the board accept the monitoring report EL2 treatment of people as amended.
Second.
Excellent.
Great. We have Dr. Dana Bailey and Donna Hood here to share more about this collaboration and leading the gathering of this evidence, but also in partnership and collaboration with many others. So thank you.
Thank you. Executive limitations 2 on treatment of people includes both the behaviors of adults and how students experience school through the development of school culture, opportunities where creativity and individual passions are developed, communications with students and families about school programs, and how to advocate when something is amiss at school. This monitoring report has overlap with other monitoring reports, such as how the SEL curriculum supports the development of culture and student well-being. Included in this monitoring report are 3 examples of the required 15 lessons that all students in elementary schools receive. Principal evaluations offer leaders the opportunity to reflect on how culture and school safety are experienced by our students, and the student survey questions through the ISD surveys and the Healthy Youth surveys reveal how students experience this culture during their school day. The student survey responses on grit and perseverance, as well as having adults at school lean in and support their growth and success, are presented throughout the grades. There were many instances where families were invited to participate in events and activities intended to support the building of connections between home and school. The preschool and kindergarten programs use the first 3 days of school to do individual meetings to invite families to come to school prior to the first day as an opportunity to welcome students to school and support this transition for our youngest learners. Always popular, the kindergarten roundup allows students who will be bus riders to ride that big yellow bus prior to the first day of school so that the kindergartners can know exactly what to expect, because the first day they go to school, there will also be big kids on the bus. The equity department hosted many events that created opportunities for students and families who have questions about the U.S. school system and questions about how to navigate supporting their own students. The Special Services Department hosted several listening sessions to elicit parent feedback on how to improve collaboration through the IEP process. Communication with parents about program opportunities is captured in the student course selections for secondary students and in the high school and beyond planning that illustrates the importance of lining up the classes that get students where they want to go and keep options and doors open if the student doesn't yet know where they want to go. We hope to help all students achieve those secondary goals. And we're here to answer your questions.
Great, thank you. Before we go to the board discussion, I'll just ask if there's anyone that would like to give public comment during this item. Anyone in the room? Anyone on Zoom? All right, thank you very much. All right. I'll start by saying thank you for sharing about the exception with the loss of the box at Cougar Mountain Middle School during that move. I think we appreciate hearing when things do happen and something doesn't quite go as according to plan. I appreciate that you guys did all the work to try to find the box and recover the files. So it's one of those things that happens. We just document it and go on from there. So thank you for doing that. And then other questions, comments on this monitoring report? No. I thought this was great. I really enjoyed, I ended up clicking into the one on the counseling synopsis. It's just amazing all the work that the counselors do tied in with the MTSS systems. And it really reinforced our MTSS in tier 1 for all, tier 2 for some, tier 3 for a few concept. And the full range of looking at what our students do. And actually I might be out of my turn because that might be part of the ends 4, I think is what I'm talking about.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. But I just thought that was so interesting on the way it did it. But now I'm looking at my notes and I think I got myself ahead by one subject. It's just been one of those days, I can tell you. I have been all over the place today. All right. Director Maldo?
One of the things that jumped out and, because this is about treatment of people and how students are feeling. And I noticed a really high percentage of students that said they were bullied in 6th grade. And I think it was at 37% or 32%. But that's really high. And I know we have things like web where where everyone belongs or things like that. But with our MTSS structure, what are we doing around the fact that such a high percentage of our 6th graders are coming from what I think is a much safer feeling environment of elementary school where you have one teacher, that teacher knows you, you get to know your classmates each year. And then you go into this environment where it's 6 different classes, 6 different teachers. Some of them might like you, some of them might not. You're changing into a person of your own and they're feeling like there's such an intense bullying going on in our district. And I haven't looked to see whether or not that correlated to any one specific middle school, like higher than any others, or is that pretty consistent across the schools?
I'd have to look more carefully at the data that you're looking at, but I would offer this as an idea. The change from 5th grade to 6th grade is enormous, and there's lots of events built into the beginning of 6th grade to make sure students know, first of all, where their familiar adults are, how to get to the office, and how to report bullying, because they go through a time where everything that feels like unkind behavior is named as bullying, and we help them grow through that to, technically the elements that meet the bullying threshold. That said, we want them to feel safe and be comfortable in their middle school environment. If we probably polled 100 adults and asked them if middle school was their favorite time of their schooling experience, I don't know how many would say, yes, I want to go back and be in middle school again. But some people grow up to be middle school principals to really want to be in middle school again. But I do think it's important to note that that's their perception. That's their perception. And so we just have to keep pressing through the MTSS tier 1 interventions, the knowing how to report things, to making sure that they know what to do when they feel like it's not quite right. And I think that's really important.
It's interesting tied to that, though, at the same time, 83% of the kids feel safe at school.
Yeah, but I think the feeling safe at school is more like, I don't think a shooter is going to come in, or I don't think the building is going to catch fire. And to your point, I understand that probably most of those wouldn't rise to the technical HIB definition of bullying. But to Director Moraldo's point, it still means that a third of your 6th graders have experienced unkind behaviors, to use your words, and that's not great either. So it is something that's concerning.
And what are we doing in our SEL lessons to kind of speak to the kids that are doing the unkind behaviors? Because I think that ends up becoming a problem throughout our middle schools into high school, and we hear it in language that's being used directed from one student to another. That piece doesn't seem to be going away. We may not call that bullying, or they may not perceive that as bullying anymore, but it's still that sense of what our expectations are. Are we clearly defining our expectations of how they should be treating one another? And I think that might be some questions for me about just that really stood out.
Thank you. And I will look next year in the monitoring report for the sample lessons on the bystander responsibilities and see if I can bring those forward.
Well, that'd be a good addition. And, oh yeah, are you gonna make a note of that? Great. All right, anything else? Okay. Nope, all right. All right, then the motion on the floor is approval of the monitoring report for EL2 treatment of people. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. All right. We are now on to the monitoring report for ends 4, life management and personal awareness, and we'll start with a motion.
I move the board accept the monitoring report ends for life management and personal awareness as presented.
Second.
All right. All right. Turn it over to you guys.
Great. So Dr. Bailey is staying up for this overview, and she's joined by Rich Melish.
Thank you. ENS 4 speaks to student wellness and preparation for their future. And the ENS 4 monitoring report includes the curricular and co-curricular pieces that support students in their overall development. Some elements of ENS 4 reiterate information shared in previous reports, including the social media and healthy youth survey. New to this monitoring report are the student responses on having access to co-curricular activities. Largely, students in the ISD report they have access to the outside of school activities to the extent that they desire. Supporting student choice is how they accomplish their individual school and personal goals, has been reported earlier in the number and variety of electives. New in this report is the student opportunity to take online classes within their school day. The online learning summary report shows both enrollment in online courses and the student reason why taking online courses was desired. As you can see, math and world language were the most frequent enrollments, and the most frequently stated reasons were learning style and acceleration. Opportunities to create and innovate are found in both co-curricular and curricular experiences for students. Classes such as Inventors Lab, video game design, and after-school opportunities such as business and marketing and DECA provide students the opportunity to solve real-world problems in new and innovative ways. Being encouraged to solve problems creatively and to use creativity is an element of the student surveys throughout the grades and are reported within. The life skill of grit and the life skill of perseverance, of bouncing back after perceived failure and trying new techniques to tackle tough problems, sticking with challenging work is something that we ask our students to practice throughout their school years. Student reports on these questions generally reveal they feel it's likely they'll be able to stick with challenging work and persevere through struggles. Learning to work together to a shared outcome is a life skill we hope our students practice and polish through their school experiences, and the student survey data reveals that most of our students report being confident about their skills and abilities while collaborating with peers. The required high school and beyond plan data shows how our students set goals for high school and beyond, how their course selection process connects to achieving these goals or keeping doors open while students figure out what they'd like to do after high school. The Washington University's made a strong showing last year. We won't say who's first and who's second, but you can look it up. And the top 3 most popular career clusters are the arts, AV technology, human services, and health sciences. The most favored activities in the high school and beyond plan were the senior exit interviews, which require students to respond to questions that align with our ends, including this ends that we're presenting today. Happy to take questions.
All right, thank you very much. I'll start with any public comment in the room or on Zoom. All right, and if there's no public comment, then I'll open it up to the board for discussion.
I think there's a typo in this on the bottom of page 2. It says,
Oh, yes.
the responses indicate that less than 10% of students believe they have been taught how to appropriately use technology in safe and ethical ways. And I think it's the
Flipped.
reverse. I think believe they have not been.
I think so
taught.
too. I caught that too, but forgot to mention it to you. I think, yeah, if you look at your
'Cause
numbers.
it doesn't track with the table. And also that would be sort of a
Yes.
terrifying thing if it were true.
It would be. I think you forgot the knot. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
Apologies. The data table is a direct snip, so that's
Yes.
what's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh,
I
that's-
just, I wouldn't throw out the report, but I
no,
think we should fix it before we book it.
right. I think you guys could fix that. Yes, and this was definitely the one where I found the information about the counseling synopsis that I really liked, as you can tell. because I was eager to share that. I thought that was really a good description as we've gone through all this work on MTSS materials. Other comments? Director Gallinger.
Yeah, I saved all my time from EL2 to talk about this one. So I'll start on page 1. So I want to know what's the so what about this? So at the first data table about PE, 95% pass rate. So
Yeah, that's good.
that's a big number of kids who aren't passing. It's like saying every 6th grader at Pine Lake failed PE. So the first data table, like 4,554 students in the cohort of high school, and 95% of them passed. Right? If you do the math, it's like 250 kids didn't pass PE. So I want to know, what are we doing about it? Like, we've heard consistently ever since I've been here about PE and PE being like PE should not be a roadblock to graduating high school. Like, I'm just gonna come out and say it. So I want to know, what are we doing about it that we're going to start seeing different data? Because it shouldn't be where, and what I use an example of, that's like the whole 6th grade class at one of our middle schools not passing PE. And so I think I need to see something different in this, and maybe not in this, but then at least as you guys talk through it about, hey, so this is the in arrears, but so this year we're doing X to make sure that this number that we bring you next year isn't the same. Because if we continue to have that many students not pass PE, then we as a system are doing something wrong. Is it going to be 100%? No, but 95%, that's not passing in my book.
With 7-period day though, would that necessarily cause someone not to graduate?
Well, you have to have PE to graduate high school.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
they
I
have to make
understand
it
that,
up.
but I'm saying it depends on when you do it. Yes, if you do it spring of your senior year, you're in a whole lot of trouble. But if you fail PE your sophomore year, you can take it again. You can take it in summer school. We have all kinds of options for kids who fail all kinds of classes. I mean, it's not ideal, but
Which I want to know is why. So I need to know more granular. Why do we have 250 kids not passing PE?
So we can invite up Andrea Zier to talk about that if she has, some details on that one from the high school level. And
Yeah, because does that include waivers?
I'm sure it does when it's listed.
Would they,
Yeah, that would be an
Yeah, they
automatic
would
pass.
pass.
it would be a pass?
Oh,
Okay.
and I think they're very, well, I think there are very few waivers. I don't think there's a lot of waivers, but there are other ways that kids get PE that would all be considered as passing.
So why this matters to me is because this is a complete opposite of how our data trend is. So if you look at our middle school, for instance, like pull reading or math. If you look at reading or math scores in middle school, they go from surprisingly some like just awful to by the time they pass that, by the time you look at their 10th grade, like we have like,
SBA test.
right,
Yeah.
they're all passing. So versus this, we go from 99% of kids pass middle school PE, and then we drop down to 95%. And that's why it's a complete reversal of the trend that we see in our core classes.
I think I'm probably not gonna have like the greatest, most complex answer right now on my feet, but I think there's a few things. One is I know that the numbers are nowhere near 250 because not all kids are taking PE at the same time. So like I'd actually want to dig into the numbers. The other thing, because I think one of you had actually emailed around a question around this. So I was looking into it and I was thinking interesting about this because to me, when I pulled like several of the courses, there were actually like more egregious courses. As far as discrepancies from like school to school and in courses, there were some as high as 50% of an F rate in a course. And so to me, I was wondering, is PE on our mind because of, recent dialogue? But I think holistically, what we do around pass rates is at each of the grading periods, our principals are pulling the F rates by course and by teacher, and then communicating when there's outliers and giving that data to the teachers to evaluate, to compare like within a cohort and their own numbers when they're above average, and then having those conversations around what are we going to do to alleviate this. And so PE would be no exception to that. They'd be having those conversations around, hey, this is higher than average for your peers. I don't think they've done the school to school because the principals don't have access to that, but they do that within the school building, and then work to provide supports to address certain things. Like I know, I think we've talked about this before. I know in biology, the first year we did the new biology curriculum, at mid-quarter, the first time the F rates went in biology from a pretty low percentage to significantly higher. And then we all, as a biology team, after looking and evaluating that data, started to make some adjustments to how we're implementing the curriculum. So things come out of those conversations around specific supports and getting to like a root cause analysis of why they're higher. And we do that, but it's hard to dig into like each specific course and to provide that robust support for each one, but that is work that is happening in our buildings. I'd have to dig deeper into the exact numbers of PE. And I'd want to talk to the principals around specific things at each building that have been done around those.
Right, and you'd really have to compare to the pass rates for all the courses, because is this any different than?
Because I
a
found
different
much greater
subject?
discrepancies in other courses from school to school than PE. When you asked that question, because I was like, oh, is that the only one that has such an egregious discrepancy from school to school around a particular course? And it wasn't. So then it made me ask the question around the school to school comparison. Like French was one that stood out to me. I have some in the back, the back that I pulled up because Erin Connolly and I were talking about that after you had mentioned that question. So I mean, I think that this illuminates work for us to do around EL12, around some of the comparison of course to course with how some of the grading practices. I think this correlates to that work in that conversation. But and I know holistically what we do around our F data at each grading period, but I would have to do more work to specifically address the one particular course.
Yeah, and this is in isolation, right? Because this is an end that we review this, like we spend a lot of B2 talking about our core classes. And so I'm not comparing it to that because this is what was presented to us. So it's not that I picked this out and be like, I'm going to choose PE. This is the data you guys chose to bring forward, just to be clear to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, so the so what is important to be able to answer, and we can extend that further as we continue to prepare for our reports, but I appreciate that feedback. Or the question rather.
Then the next one, if you go to the top of the following page, which is a Help Youth Survey questions addressing emotional health, and you open that up. I just wanted to bring to the attention of, then you look at page 4. And it's the depression ones and the suicidal ideation ones. And this, why for me, the homework and grading policy and practices are so important. And when we look and see that 1 in 5 of our 10th graders contemplated suicide in the past year, so it means as 9th graders, that's because isn't Healthy Youth Survey administered in the fall?
Mhm.
Right. So it was they're thinking about their freshman year. Like 1 in 5. That's why we've got, and we can no longer wait to what Dr. Weaver said about like how long is it going to take for our teachers to understand the importance of having this practice of homework and grading, because it is impacting our students' mental health and well-being. And for like the meeting the clinical definition of depression, it's almost 1 in 3 of our high school students. That's way too many. And so we have to do our part as a system to not be contributing to what is this ongoing crisis in mental health in children. And it's not just Issaquah children. And so, I mean, it's nationwide, but I think we have enough, hopefully, foresight to recognize and make changes and pivot much earlier than potentially other systems. and our kids deserve that and deserve us to do that work now. Because it is, I think, system work in order to address that. But the numbers keep going up. And if you look over time, like we're not going the right direction. And, you know, we intervened and added counseling when we were at 1 in 4. And now we're at 1 in 5. So it's,
Right.
I want to know, and this is
Right.
probably a offline work
Yeah.
study conversation or retreat conversation. But we've got to figure out something because what we're doing isn't working.
Although this is from 2021, so you are getting, there's a pandemic effect in there. It's still not good,
Right.
don't misunderstand me, but I think in terms of the trend line, I think some of that is pandemic.
Could be, but you look at me, and if you look at the 10th grade for depression, I mean, it follows the trend of 2018, which was not pandemic.
Yeah.
So if we were drawing like just statistical lines, it would completely match. So I not discounting the pandemic effect,
Mhm.
but nonetheless, that's not what we live in. So whether it is or was or wasn't, like regardless, that's where our students are right now. And we have to figure out how we change the narrative. So we change the data.
Other items.
I did just want to say, so the students will be taking the Healthy Youth Survey again in the fall. And so next year at this time, that information will be available. So it will be interesting to see because we know a lot of trends
Mhm.
changed. If you look at the substance use, there was a significant drop pretty much across the board in 2021. And we believe that that's because of the great increase in protective factors of parental involvement, being at home, spending time with family, and a reduction of risk factors. They weren't out with friends that might be giving them substances, or they just didn't have access. So that greatly reduced. They weren't able to get into stores, things like that. So there were a lot of things that limited students' access to those risk, the risk behaviors fell, the protective factors increased. So as we've moved away from the pandemic, it will be interesting to see what happens to those trends. And I think that's why some of the social emotional lessons around substance use is going to be really important for students.
Right, that will be really interesting, once we get the results for that. And then it'll be a consistent group of kids, because we shifted which group of kids are being surveyed, when the pandemic happened.
Next October will be the second time that cohort of students participate in the Healthy Youth Survey.
Right, because I always found it interesting.
Yeah.
that one kid never did the health use survey. And the
And
other
the
two
twins.
always did, because they were,
Mhm. Yeah.
in different cohorts of the healthy use survey.
And
Took me a while to realize that was how it worked.
mine were spaced, so they both took
Yeah.
it all
Oh,
4
they always
years,
took it. Yeah,
all 4 times.
yes. It was quite the dinner conversation after they came home after taking the healthy use survey.
Next year, when you present the Swedish-based mental health counselor data, can you have them include the month of May? Particularly with all of our testing that happens with state AP, IB testing, I would really like to know what the visit data looks like in May. And so
Mm,
that's a critical month that we just know nationally. And what I see in my day job, May is a really rough month for kids. So, and we don't have any data on May.
Noted.
Other things. Anything else? Right.
Do we,
Oh, go ahead.
can we just
Yeah.
have some conversation about the digital citizenship part? And again, this is more the like, what are we doing about that? Again, back to the Healthy Youth Survey, like it's terrifying about the data for received sexual photos or videos.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I don't know if you just wanted a quick update on that in general. So at the elementary, we continue to be generally pleased with the lessons that our librarians have put in their scope and sequence. When we get to the middle school, we just at our last board meeting approved the adoption of, I'm going to forget the name of the curriculum off the top of my head, but a new digital citizenship curriculum for middle school. We're super excited about that. The committee felt like it was super relevant to students and done in a very a way that we feel will really reach students well and make it easy for teachers to have meaningful conversations about digital citizenship throughout the middle school years. And so that we do feel like that's going to be an important piece to make our work around digital citizenship more impactful. In the high school, combined with, we had 3 lessons that were added in the high school through the flex time lessons over the last year. These are lessons that were created in collaboration with teachers. I think, well, I'll speak to it, and if I need to be corrected, I have colleagues who can correct me a bit more, but we really worked hard because just like with social emotional learning, you find that students feel like by the time they get to high school, they've heard these things many times and it can feel canned. But we did find some ways, the teachers have really come up with some ways to reach high school students to talk about digital citizenship. But we are certainly not blind to the fact that our students live on, I've got a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old just has that constant device and the constant pressure to be communicating with friends in different ways. And I think we've seen in recent media just continued challenges that our youth have around the impact of social media on their lives. So we do take that very seriously and know that's an important contributor to our students' social and mental health.
I guess for me, I feel like the missing piece though is the home piece. Like it's not the ISD's sole role and responsibility to do this part. But I don't feel like if I were to go poll 100 parents, I bet very few of them would know this is our school district's data. And so this is where, whether it's through the parent university platform that I know you guys are working on or whatnot, seems like some targeted information to our parents or about like we see marijuana acceptance continue to be larger, yet tobacco still is very low. So there's clear, consistent community and home messaging that I think is missing. And I think part of that is we can mutually reinforce messages only when we know them. And the same that goes with anything. I mean, as you heard me talk endlessly about learning loss recovery, when us as families have no idea how to use iReady to say, oh, just do these targeted modules. So in the same way, if our parents don't know what they could be reinforcing or what is actually going on in our community and our schools in that way, like it could spark some really good conversations and really good teaching opportunities for our families to also engage and see us as a school system as we're not here to teach your kids morality. We're here to partner with you to teach your kids how you want them taught. So I just see that again, as you look towards the strategic plan, this would be a huge element to which you could leverage. We have the students and we have the data, but we only see them 8 hours a day, 7 hours a day, so whatever it is, the number. So we need to really, we aren't going to move the needle on our Healthy Youth Survey until we engage our parents.
I'm sure this is one of the areas I know the PTA has had numerous parent education, but again, needs to get even broader than just those who might engage with a PTA educational event. But I know they do really good work bringing in speakers on this topic. And so they might also be somebody that you can partner with to help both with speakers or engagement and getting the word out, because I know they find this very important as well.
But it could be like, we have the control, right? Every parent has to go through and do our registration process in secondary school. So you can have a pop-up where they like give them some pertinent information for them to see as they're getting ready to go into next school year. Or when it comes out with a trimester report card or something. So there's lots of ways you can feed us our vegetables and opportune moments that we aren't going to click necessarily on an email, but we might click on those times to see. So we have to think more creatively about how we do that. Because I agree with what you said, Director Moore. Our PTSAs are amazing. But again, that's still a small,
Yeah.
like the selection bias in that population is not what we're wanting to see.
We do have an award-winning communications department who will help me with that.
There you have it. All right. Anything else? Director Moraldo?
I think one other thing I wanted to touch on was in, what section am I in? 4.6 around resiliency, and especially when you get into like the middle school questions and high school questions. If you fail to reach an important goal, how likely are you to try again? Or if you have a problem while working towards an important goal, how well can you find strategies? And I think the number of kids that fall in that middle, somewhat likely, I think is a concern for me. I mean, I think, kids that are saying, they're slightly likely, and we know that there's problems with them having resilience if they run into a problem. I think they're probably the easier ones to identify, and they might have already been identified through our MTSS strategies. But really, where do those midliners that I sometimes push through and sometimes I don't, I'm somewhat likely, but still reticent to push through. And I'm wondering, where we are within our strategies. Is there any way to really kind of tap into those kids that I'd like to see that somewhat likely shrink, and the quite likely and extremely likely grow? And I don't know if there's any thoughts around work in that area, and maybe your interpretation of what does that middle line mean for you? Because I think that's something I don't get from here, is what's the interpretation of the data that you have here?
I have two thoughts. The first one is, from a consistency standpoint, the surveys for the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school were written at different times and by different people. And the forced choice of not having a midline answer would require middle school students to have an opinion. I'm either likely or not likely to be able to push through and try again. So that's a statistical question, but the middle schoolers are given a neutral option, and the elementary school students have to either agree or disagree. So that's one thought. And I also think that when we build out surveys going forward, that includes questions from the strategic plan, and also digging deeper on this, we can track them through their ages. So we see how they report in the end of elementary school, then we skip 6th grade. So if we ask 6th graders a question, that might complete the story, and then watching the through line into 9th grade, and very especially that high school exit survey and how they do by the end. Because as you've stated before, they're growing. They don't always know what they think they ought to do or how to persevere. So holding on to a point in time in the middle of middle school on a question that says, Nebula says, I can keep trying, or I can try a different strategy. We want them to be able to have that skill by the time they leave us and go out into the world. But I do think that building some consistency in the way we ask the questions and requiring a choice might help answer your question. Yeah, sorry.
I actually love the question, because this question of how do I control my learning and learn from my failure is really critical. And it's actually one of the places where you can connect to integrated MTSS. I'll give two quick story examples of what we're doing about this. We recently brought together, well, we've been working all year on developing the new 6th grade math courses. And recently in one of the meetings, the teachers helping to develop that course came together to really say, what are we making sure we're doing to make sure every student believes that they can do mathematics and that they will have access to the mathematics. And then we went further to say, what do the materials that we're introducing help us to help the students who are stumbling and help them go? And part of what that is also how the students are also monitoring their own growth and learning so that they can set a goal and persist and get there. And we were super excited because the 6th grade teachers that were doing this were starting to get really excited about taking a different mental approach to 6th grade mathematics. We were also doing a similar conversation with 6th grade ELA teachers of saying, how do we carve out space, not fill the curriculum so full that we don't have time to circle back to students who are struggling and build space to be able to go to them, help them recover from that failure and show that they can grow from that. So that's actually a really important part of our MTSS processes is to address this exact thing. And we're looking forward to continuing that work with more teams as we go forward. So I'm excited about this work.
Right.
Thank you. That sounds really good.
And then just one final comment. I know there's a lot of bar graphs with numbers, and I'm wondering if we could have one numbers and then like in parentheses, the percentage that it is. Because otherwise it requires me to do way too much math in my head.
I hear you. Thank you for that feedback.
All right. Anything else? All right. Then this is up for a vote. The motion on the floor is approval of the monitoring report for ends for life management and personal awareness. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, and that one passes for you. Thank you very much. All right, moving along, we are on to revisions to board policy N3 civic engagement.
I move the board accept the revisions to board policy N3 civic engagement as presented.
Second.
All right. And these are the changes to N3 that we discussed at the last meeting. I'm going to see if there's anyone that has any public comment on this. Is there anyone in the room or on Zoom that has public comment on our changes for N3? All right. Primarily the change is to have the first sentence read, students will live as responsible members of society, demonstrating integrity and compassion. Any discussion on this? All right, then all those in favor of the change to N3 say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right, this passes and we have a new N3. So we will have to change our sign.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I mean, there might need
And
to be
get
a
a
vision sign
Sharpie.
as well. So there's some
know.
updates that need to happen anyways.
Our vision could go above it. Well, we got the mission over here. Maybe it should go there. Yes, this would be good to bring our vision in and then we can update our N3 over there to match it. That'd look good. Yes. Yes, across our entire backside. So it could always be in the in our the
It'll be on
video.
the camera.
It will be. I like that. That'd be a good idea. All right. Okay, we are on to legislative matters.
No updates.
No updates? Okay, that was fast. And then on to announcements and correspondence. Anybody have anything they need to announce? Nope. Okay, I don't either. And then last up is calendaring and future agenda topics. I don't really have any calendaring other than to remind people that I don't know if some of you are going to the Issaquah PTSA Council lunch, which I think is Thursday of this week. And then our next board meeting is June 8th, and the ISD retirement party is at 4 o'clock that day for those that are able to attend. And then June 9th is our exec session at 1. June 14th starts our graduation excitement with Gibson Eck and ACT. And then June 15th is Issaquah, Liberty and Skyline at T-Mobile. So, and Diane, unless there was anything else we needed to do? All right. Oh, I'm sorry, Director.
No,
Polly.
I just wanted to state that I'm not going to be able to attend the ACT graduation.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. All right. No harmony on that one.
Did you want to look at your calendars for the retreat in August, the board retreat?
I don't think without Sydney here, it matters.
Yeah.
I think
Okay,
we-
okay.
Yeah, thanks for suggesting that. We should chat with her and start to put together some dates to see when we're gonna do the.
Say good luck with that. I'm out of town for the better part of August.
Right, it would have to be September. I also will not,
Yeah,
I won't even.
I mean, I will be
And
here
I
for the board meetings,
right.
but
I think September will be hard too. So I think it's gonna be a challenge, but we're gonna work on it. So thank you for bringing that up. All right. Oh, unless there is anything else from anyone else?